Hi y'all, I'm Amber and today I'm going to be doing my December wrap-up and January TBR. I will be at the end talking about my statistics for this past year and also my top 5 books. First, onto the wrap-up, which I only read 5 books in the month of December, which is actually much better than I thought it was going to be because I knew I was having a bit more harder time with reading just because I'm not really sure. It's December, typical December stuff happening, so I think that I slowed down just a little bit because of that. First book that I read was City of Women by David R. Gilham. This is about Sigrid Schroeder, and this is also taking place in World War II. She lives in Berlin and everybody sees her as like the perfect German soldier's wife, but when you look under the surface, you realize that she really isn't. Her lover was a Jew. After he left, she basically turns her blinders on. She lives mechanically, not really realizing the truth of the war, until one day those blinders are taken off. I did a full review on this. I will put links to all the reviews. For most of these I did do a review on them, so look down below to see what I had to say about that if you haven't already heard them. And this one gets 4 stars. The second book was Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. This is about Inman and Ada, who fell in love before the Civil War actually began. And Inman is a Confederate soldier who has steadied to abandon his post to find his way back to Ada. As he's journeying back to her, Ada is struggling to survive on her father's rundown farm after he passed away. And of course she has no clue how to run it because her father didn't give her any chance to learn. As I mentioned before, I did do a review on a lot of these books, and this is one of them. I did a film and book comparative alongside the reviews, so check that out. I had a lot of issues with the book. I actually liked the film better than the book. I will have to reread this because I felt like I could have gotten more if I had actually gotten through it. I went halfway before I decided that I was done with it, but I thought that I had enough because I did skim through the rest of the book to have a full opinion on it. And as I was thinking about that, I realized that maybe I missed something. Like, I'm just really hoping that I did. So I will be rereading this before I actually give it away to see if my opinion changes the second time around. I gave Cold Mountain 3 stars. And I read Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. This was a library book, so I do not have it anymore. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. You can check the review out if you haven't already. The link will be down below. The fourth book is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I did not do a review on this one, and this is about Celie, who is a child wife. And Celie has been separated from her sister Nettie, and it's about her life with her husband and her children, and also her dealing with being separated from her sister. I really love the unique way of telling the story through letters to God and eventually 2 letters to her sister. I really enjoyed this story. I was expecting to love it because I really loved the film, and I felt the film did justice to this book. I felt like at the same time things went by so fast, and this is really not negative on the book, but I read this book so fast that I felt like I was missing some things, although I did get the themes out of the book. But this is definitely a book that I will be rereading, and I absolutely loved this book. I loved Celie, who, even though she was going through a lot of crap and at one point she wanted to kill Mr., she did have this optimistic view on life, which kept her going in the very hard moments. So of course this book gets 5 stars. Then I read Common Sense by Thomas Paine. I'm not giving Common Sense a star rating at all because I just don't feel like it's something that I can give a rating, or I feel like I just can't because I am not judging it on the normal things I judge a book on. I only read Common Sense. There's a lot of other things in here. Rights of Man, which I am definitely going to be reading. And there's other essential writings that he wrote. But I wanted to read Common Sense first, and so I did. Which is his pamphlet that he wrote before the Revolutionary War started, he kind of wrote it giving all the reasons for why they should go to war with against Britain, or sorry, England. But he's, like I said, given all these reasons, and I was really intrigued by the reasons. There were some reasons where I was like, really? I'm not really sure, like, you're being logical about this. But I'm very interested to see how his viewpoints changed when I read Rights of Man, because I think there's going to be things that he's going to say that might have switched around from common sense, which was before. Now on to my January TBR. I did say that I was going to borrow more in my goals for this year, but I've changed that up. That's my prerogative. I am not going to be borrowing any books until I've gotten halfway through my TBR pile on these shelves. I counted them out and I realized that I have approximately 105 books to get through, so I want to cut that in half. I want at least to have 50 books only that I haven't read yet, and then I can borrow books alongside reading my own. So that's a change. So there is no library books on my TBR. The first book that I plan to read this month is Dark Sky by Carl Neggers. This is a mystery romance, I'm guessing. There's two people, a woman named Juliet and a guy named Ethan, who are going after the same guy. He's just on his trail and she is worried that he's going to come after her, so she's on his trail trying to find him before he finds her, and they kind of collide against each other while at the same time they're fighting against their feelings for each other. Even though I know that I probably am going to have a lot of issues with this book. I'm going to be reading Dune by Frank Herbert. This is the first book in a series, I think. I don't know if it's a series or a trilogy, but it's sci-fi. I am not even going to try to explain what it is about. I have a hard time understanding it myself at times, but I've been hearing a lot of good things about this book from people who read a lot of sci-fi themselves, so I'm very excited to get into this series, at least this book. I will also be trying to read East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I read his book The Pearl and I really enjoyed that, so I'm looking forward to getting into a more different works of his. It's much more thicker than The Pearl, so I'm hoping that there will be a lot more to it. This one is about two families who keep reliving the Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel stories from the Bible. I am very intrigued by this because of that, and I am looking forward to seeing what John Steinbeck has done with that story. Next one is Emrys Gift by W. Bruce Cameron, and this is about a boy and a father who are grieving after the boy's mother dies, and they're kind of in their own worlds dealing with the grief. And one day the boy is hanging out in the woods behind their house, and a cougar, I think it's a cougar or a mountain lion, tries to attack him, and a bear that's supposed to be extinct rescues him. Very intrigued by this book just because of the bear aspect. It's very interesting sounding, caught my eye, and I definitely have to read this month. The last book that I'm going to be trying to read this month is Fever 1793 by Laurie Halse Anderson. I read her book Speak and I really enjoyed that book. I thought that she handled that very sensitive subject very well, so I wanted to read more of her, and I found this book at a used bookstore, so I grabbed it up. This is about Maddie Cook during the summer of 1793 when this fever breaks out in the city that she's living in. Her mother, on her deathbed, begs her to go with her grandfather and try to leave the town, but when she leaves the house and gets into the city, she realizes that it's worse than they expected, and she has to try to survive in a very different world than she was used to. Very interesting, a very dark, I feel, story that this is going to be, but I'm looking forward to getting into more of her works. I really liked her writing in Speak, so I'm expecting it to be the same. On to my statistics plus top 5. Top 5 books for 2014 are kind of weird just because one of them is actually a 3-star, some of them are 4 stars, and only one of them is actually a 5-star rating. So that's very interesting because I usually tend to stick with my 5-star ratings. But this year, a lot of the books just weren't as great as I thought they were going to be, but they connected to me on a very great level that I was kind of surprised with, especially with my first top 5, which is No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. This book, I was very surprised at how much I connected with this story, because I had a lot of issues with the writing and just certain things he did with the storytelling, but the story itself really just captivated me, and I kept thinking about it even months after I read the book. The 4th book that's on my top 5 is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. This book had a lot of meaning to me. I got a lot out of it through her journey through these 3 countries that she went through. It just had a lot of meaning to it that I wasn't expecting, considering how it was written. It was very on the lighter side, but at the same time there was a lot of meat and depth to it, which just made the reading more meaningful. The 3rd book is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. What I really liked was his perspective on death and what happens afterwards. I'm always intrigued by other people's beliefs in that. We all have our own way of dealing with death, and I really did like the way he was handling it. It was a very interesting read overall, and I did get a lot out of it. The second one is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. If I remember correctly, this is like the first mystery book, and Wilkie Collins did a great job. It's dark, it's very mysterious, it's kind of creepy, yet it was really wonderful. It kept me into the story, although at times I did feel like he could have condensed some things or kept some things out, because there were times where I felt like he was running on and on and on about some things. But overall, a really great read, and it really stuck with me. My number 1 top 5 book for 2014 is Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. This is the 5-star rated book, and I absolutely loved it. Palahniuk took me on a crazy whirlwind of a ride trying to figure out what was going on here, and it was so unexpected, yet it should have been, I should have seen it. It was just really amazing. It blew my mind away because he did it in such a way that even though it was obvious, it wasn't obvious. It was one of those crazy things you have to read it to understand what I'm saying. And it was just amazing. The way he wrote this book was amazing. Everything was it was crazy. And you kind of have to go into it with an open mind because you're probably going to either like it or not. So, Fight Club, the number 1 book of 2014 for me. Now on to my statistics. There's 3 parts here. The books I've read for the first time, the books that I read from the library, and the books I've reread this year. And then I'll tell you my total. So the total books I read for the first time is 80 books. The books that I've reread are 26 books. And the books from the library was 34 books. In total, I was able to, surprisingly enough, read 105 books. When I made my goal on Goodreads, I started it out at 75 books, and basically I kept going up every month. And then at the beginning of December, I was not really sure I was going to finish it, so I had lowered it to 100. I had it on 105. And then I changed it because I didn't think I was going to make it. So I did, but I still have it on 100. I wasn't going to go back up. Either way, I succeeded in my goal because my goal was 75 books only. And I think that I can read 105 books this year. I think I could finish all my TBR if I focus on them only. Tell me down below what you've read this month and what are any of your favorites for this year. I would love to know. Thank you all so much for watching, and keep warm.